Hello, wonderful people. Shaun Tucker here, coach, trainer, and the man behind the mic in the brand new podcast, How Are You Really Mum? With the fresh male perspective, this is a place where we will unveil the layers and celebrate the woman behind motherhood. In How Are You Really Mum, we acknowledge the joys, the challenges, the growth, and the tears. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the How Are You Really Mum podcast with me, Shaun Tucker, and I'm joined by the awesome Simone Lord today. And if you don't know Simone's purpose is to inspire leaders to reach their peak performance. She is a mum to 3 young boys, and she's juggled a corporate career for over 18 years, whilst her husband works 24/7 in the community service sector. She's also herself a business owner and a huge community advocate. She understands how tough it is to manage the daily grind when there are so many competing priorities. She's also a firm believer that looking after yourself and finding the right people to support you in business and in life is the most important thing you can do to achieve your success. So Simone, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Shaun. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you.
Yes, and it's been a great pleasure to get to know you over the last couple of years since I've been in this online space as well. And, we were doing collaborations before, and I'm sure we will continue to collaborate in the future because, I don't know, something magical just happens when we get together, doesn't it?
It does. I think, we started from like a business kind of relationship, and then it developed into a friendship, and it's just continued on. So, I'm very grateful to have you in my life and to be here sharing this space with you, talking all things about being a mum.
Yes, and being a mum to 3 young boys. How old are your boys again?
Yeah, so my eldest Ethan is 10 years old, Riley is 8 years old, and my littlest is Blake, and he just turned 6. So all 2 years apart.
And obviously it's a house full of boys. And you guys do have a dog now as well, which is it's a female dog, right? But that only happened
We do.
in the recent, it's been just over a year. Is that right?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, so she came for Christmas, not last year, just gone, but the one before. So she's about 18 months old. And my only prerequisite of getting an animal is that it was a female. There was enough masculine energy in my house that I said, okay, I need some more feminine energy in here.
There's enough boy body odor in this household now.
Well, I'm actually pretty lucky because we haven't got to that part yet. So the boys aren't smelly yet. They're still little enough not to smell. So that's good.
Yes, so much to look forward to, right?
So I'm told.
Well, tell us more about, obviously you have faced a lot of challenges. You've been pretty open and vulnerable in sharing some of your challenges when you first had your first child, right? There was a number of challenges with yourself and the family as it was growing and developing. Tell us about that. What was happening?
Yeah, so I was 28 years old when I first got pregnant with my first son. So I don't even know what that is in these days, if that's early, if that's old, or I'm not sure, somewhere in between. And very early on in my pregnancy, we found out my husband had a tumor. He had testicular tumor. So that was quite a traumatic pregnancy to be going through pregnancy for your first time. You don't really know what to expect in terms of the changes within your body and how you feel physically and mentally. To add in such a traumatic time with my husband's health, where you're really worried about whether you're going to be doing this solo, is this how life is supposed to be? And, all of those really big, hard questions to confront yourself with. It really changes how you process and internalize a trauma, because it's not just about you anymore. It's already started a journey of responsibility of raising another human. So to go through that experience, I really turned a lot to my physical well-being. I didn't realize that at the time, but I definitely used exercise as an outlet because as you're pregnant, obviously all the normal things like perhaps having a few glasses of wine or using other methods to cope with a stressful situation was not something that I was going to be doing being pregnant. So I
Yeah.
turned to physical well-being to manage and cope in that time. Didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but later on in the years it started to unpack itself and I realized how that served me at the time but didn't serve me long term in the future. So that was a really interesting time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, how interesting when you're faced with not your own mortality, but really it's about the survival of the priority, right? Which is the life that you're carrying in your womb,
Yeah.
right? And if
Yeah.
your partner, if you're unsure of how what's going to happen, there's so much uncertainty. It really does beg the question of like, can I do this? If things were to go really south, can I manage? Often those questions we can't really sit with. And we need some sort of outlet, like you said. And you're right, because the gym and physical well-being, things like that, they can absolutely be really, really healthy. Yeah. And
Mhm.
in most cases they are. But they can also be very detrimental, can't they?
Yeah. And I think this is something that I've found out in my later years after I've had my three children and was not in that stressful situation. Thankfully, for those who don't know or don't follow me on social media, my husband is very well and healthy, and we're
Mm.
all through our remission years, and everything is kind of just back on track as to anyone else on their life's journey. So I think after all of that has played out, I realized that I did actually have an unhealthy relationship with exercise because I would use it in ways that wasn't serving me so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To cope. Fundamentally,
Yeah.
when life throws challenges at you, a lot of the time we're probably okay, but we're going to our default mode, right? We're going to
Hmm.
our comfort mode. And thankfully it was exercise. It wasn't something like, some nasty kind of drugs or something like that, right? Because
Yeah.
it's so easy to fall in that trap. And
Absolutely. Yeah,
when
it's
you,
still an unhealthy relationship in that sort of context, especially when I was dealing with some hormonal issues and a little bit of cortisol issues and adrenal issues, and then compound that with the need of having to exercise every day
yeah,
became an unhealthy relationship.
yeah. And what you said about, you're responsible for this child. Like this child's life
Mm.
is literally in your hands. I've mentioned on the podcast a number of times before. Its survival is in your hands.
Mhm.
Whether it's a boy, whether it's a girl, it doesn't matter. It's another life. And
Yeah.
it's come from you. You literally birthed that life. That life is still part of you.
Yeah.
And that would scare anyone.
Yeah. And I don't think we really understand that when we embark on this journey of wanting to be a mother. That's something I definitely always wanted. I
Yeah.
never saw myself as not having children and not having quite a few children either. So the thought that I was only going to have one child, there was a little bit of apprehension around that as well because I'd always felt like I was going to have quite a few children.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was definitely a very stressful and overwhelming time. But yeah, and then comes motherhood and all of these new things that you have no idea that you're going to be hit with and fronted with. And even though some parents or some friends would talk to you if they were a little bit of ahead of their journey, every experience is so unique that there's so many things that you go through that you don't even expect.
That's right. Expectations is such a funny thing because you can have the perfect plan for the perfect pregnancy and the perfect life, but what do we know about
Well, yeah, it leads to disappointment, isn't it? Because nothing is ever perfect.
exactly?
Yeah,
The thing
yeah,
we know about perfection is that it can lead to disappointment.
yeah,
Because really perfectly imperfect is what is perfect because nature was intended to be that way and life happens that way. If it goes
yeah.
100% to your expectation, is that really a life that's lived well? Or is that just a life that's lived?
Well, exactly. And that's what I think parenting is, that will throw you out of that. If you're someone who loves perfectionism and planning and implementing straight to black and white,
Yeah.
parenting is absolutely the thing that will rip that apart for you and put you together in a completely different way. And that was me. I was very much a perfectionist. I loved doing my things in my methodical way that felt that was the right way for me to do things. It's
Yeah.
how it worked in my career. That's how I'd successfully achieved such a high career by the time I was 28, is because I worked hard and I was consistent. And that got me those results. But when you become a parent, it doesn't matter how hard you work sometimes. If it's not meant to be, it's absolutely not meant to be.
Mm.
And you just have to realize that your best is enough.
Yeah.
And that was something that I really struggled with in terms of the breastfeeding journey, because it didn't work out for me. And that is something that I really, really wanted to do. I was adamant that I was not having a cesarean
Mm.
and that I was going to successfully breastfeed. I ended up having cesarean. Well, I've had 3, and I was not able to successfully breastfeed with any of my 3 children. So that was really point of to think that it's not about trying harder. This is just actually not working for me. It wasn't an effort. It wasn't a motivation thing.
Yeah.
It was literally, welcome to the journey of parenthood. You don't always get what you want.
Yeah. Literally putting yourself in the back seat of, now you're a carer, primary carer for three boys, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge responsibility, and I think most people, like, obviously reproducing is a natural thing, right? But we live in a time now as humans that there's no need to necessarily reproduce, right? There is so many of us. If you chose not to, it's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
And that responsibility that we take on, maybe we unconsciously wanted a child to bring and to rear up in this world. But when you
Mm.
make that really conscious, it is a large responsibility, right?
Mm.
These, as parents, we become responsible for the next generation of people, of humans,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And if we keep on, let's just say, look at our parents and grandparents, and there's a lot of blame and things thrown around, like things changed and things were done different in those days and all these
Mm.
things. But really, everyone's responding in such a way. Everyone responds to
Absolutely.
something or they react, right? Either you make it
Yeah.
conscious or it's happening unconscious.
Yeah. And that could be really overwhelming when you have a child. It doesn't matter if it's your first child or your second or your third or your fourth. The
Yeah.
amount of advice and the amount of things that change constantly. And we've all heard that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And
Yeah.
it's true in so many ways, but that can be so overwhelming when you have all these different amounts of information coming from you from different generations, from how I was raised and my parents, and then my husband's parents and my in-laws. And, you have all these different dynamics of what's worked for different people.
Mhm.
And here you are as a mum trying to interpret all of this information and figure out how you want to do it, because really there is no rule book, right? We're all allowed to parent in our own specific ways. And I think that's what's really navigated my journey to, as the boys got a little bit older, it was having these real conversations with them that instilled me that I want to parent in a specific way, and it's okay if that is against the societal norms or that's not happening in our other circles. If it's something that I feel comfortable with and I'm communicating that to my husband, so we're on the same team, because I
Mhm.
feel that there's a big disconnect in parenting sometimes when mum and dad, or mum and mum, dad and dad, whatever your dynamic is, when you're not coming from the same place, it's a struggle to then parent and co-parent.
So how did you navigate that, right? Because it doesn't take a genius to figure out that there's over information,
Yeah.
right? There's just so much, and it's so conflicting. Like, you might be a research guru and just love to look at research. Well, if you're
Mhm.
going to find two ends of the same coin within the same kind of research, right, on the same topic,
Yeah.
because that's science being science. Life doesn't happen just the way you want it to. There's going to be
Mm.
different sides and different perspectives. And because we try and control the environment, right? And I think it's very logical to try and control everything. But how much of life happens without us actually controlling it,
Yeah.
right?
Well, awareness is everything, in
Yeah,
my
I agree.
opinion. And once you're aware, you can't undo that. So I think I really realized from an early stage that I was a role model and my kids are mimicking what I'm doing. And
Mm,
that was a wow. And that really came about through my weight loss journey of wanting to really lose the baby weight and going through the diet fads and things that I was doing. And I remember Ethan only being about 4 or 5 years old. And he was asking me, is potato no good for you, mom? Is pasta no good for you? Because I was low carb dieting and doing these things.
yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they're watching me. They're looking at me. Even when I don't think I'm teaching them a lesson, they are learning from me. That really instilled to me that how I displayed my behaviors was going to be how they perceive things and how they are going to grow up into the future. And that's when I really always wanted to make a conscious effort to communicate openly
Mm,
as a mum, to make sure that I was communicating with my husband as well, so we could decide not in front of the kids to disagree, but how are we going to navigate those paths together and decide what we're both comfortable with from a parenting aspect as well.
yeah. And I think you just said it right. It's the openness. Like you can't be super closed off and think that you're right, because if you think that you're right, it's probably coming from the mind. Your
Mm.
body is the thing that's carried. Like, you didn't consciously go into your body and say, this is how I'm going to get pregnant, and this is how this cell is going to do this, and all these kind of things. You didn't go in and do that. It's in there. It's genetic. It's memory. It's this happens. It's environmental stimulus, right? When
Mm.
this happens, and it just keeps on going that way.
Yeah.
And when it comes to communication, when you're on the parenting journey of whatever dynamic you said as well, like whatever is in your case, the dynamic that is at home, it does come back to open communication
Mm.
and trust. And I spoke about this on another episode as well. Trust to me is given, but it's then tested, right? And then it's built on.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think as we are getting closer to teenage years, with a 10-year-old, it's becoming that building the trust and having the communication around that. We live in a very safe and beautiful community, which I'm very grateful for. And
Mm,
it is now letting my son have the bike ride to his friend's house and, trust that he's going to be safe on the road and do those sorts of things and behave well in public when your parents aren't around, to be like, oh, that's not appropriate, or saying something like that. So it's building that next level of trust with your kids
yeah.
and having those kinds of conversations. And that's when you start to get the objections from your children as well of, well, such and such as mum lets them do this, or they're allowed to say that or behave this way. And we've always very openly said to the children, when you're a parent, you get to choose what the rules are. And these are the rules that dad and I have chosen. And it's okay if you don't like them, but we get to choose them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so important because it can be so conflicting. It's like when you
Mm-hmm.
go to another state in Australia, some of the rules are different. You go to another country and, well, who knows what the rules are sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
becomes a bit of a chaotic mess. And certainly when you go to school and you see, these kids are able to do this, but we're not able to, it's like, you, as a kid, I remember feeling a bit like either isolated or like, what's kind of wrong with me? Do I fit in here? Because when the
Mm,
social norm becomes that, and you're not able to do that, it doesn't fit in with the rules and standards of home, it becomes a bit isolating. And
yeah. And what really works for us is actually giving it an explanation. It's not just because we said so. We would
Yeah.
never say that. And that's what I copped as a child. You're here to be seen, not heard, and all of these things, and you just do it because I said so and I'm the boss and I'm the parent. And we take a very different approach with our parenting style to understand the reason behind why we do things. Our kids will often say, everyone at school's got junk in their lunchbox and we always have so much healthy food. And I'll explain to the kids that there's a time for snacks and sugar. They definitely still get their fair share of stuff, but school's not that place. You're
Mm,
there to learn and you need food that's going to help your brain to be able to concentrate. And if you have chips and if you're having snacks and those things, you're going to want to run around and play and get that energy out and not sit and learn. So I think if you always back something up with some reasoning,
mm,
it helps your children not to resent you for the decisions that you're making. And it helps you solidify why you're doing that. You don't have to feel the peer pressure of going, oh, if that's what every other parent's doing, then fine, I'll just do that too. I'm definitely not the mum that's going to cave to giving my 10-year-old son a phone just
yeah.
because his mates have got a phone. And it's really challenging to navigate all these things. You think it's hard when they're babies and you're so overwhelmed and get into it. But as they get older, the problems just kind of change to more of an emotional level of parenting than the physical parenting when they're young.
I was just going to say it becomes less physiological, so less physical and more mental. Right?
Yeah.
It becomes way more mentally stimulating because there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
more questions, there's a lot more kind of talkbacks and things like that. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting because I do remember sometimes when even I was a child, but obviously having a very young baby girl now who's 5 months old, it's still very physiological. Like she's starting obviously to take a lot more in mentally and starting to become a lot more responsive when we're doing things, but she still doesn't have the intellectual capacity to have a conversation,
Yeah.
a proper conversation, not just
Yeah.
noises. Obviously, there are distinctive tones that she's making that, it's quite funny sometimes, but yeah, I get what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah. And even before they can talk, it's the vibe, right? It's the energy that you're putting out in your household. Like, we're not, well, the kids are loud, but we're not loud, yelling type of people. So when we're in a scenario and we have some family members that are just very animated and very kind of loud, you'll see the boys kind of jump or startle just because they're not used to that kind of emotional response in a situation. So it happens so much before even talking and conversations. It's really the vibe that you have in your household as well.
Yeah, it's those rules and standards like you mentioned earlier. And I mean, how important do you think they are? Because I did quote it on another podcast, but I'm still actually not sure of the exact percentage, but parents have way less influence on their kids these days than they did, say,
Mm.
20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And it's something
Yeah.
between 20 and 30% that parents actually have influence on their children now. And I think
Mm.
that's obviously there's society in there, but there's also things like mobile devices.
Yeah. Look, I don't know the stats on it either, but my personal opinion would be on that. If you look back to, gosh, even when I was a child, a lot of the mums didn't work, right? We had stay-at-home mums that were able to teach us more life skills and be present and be around. And it is feeling like it's harder and harder to have that kind of lifestyle because we are mostly in a situation where both parents need to work now, and quite
Yeah.
often that is full-time work. So you don't have the opportunity to spend as much time with your children doing those life skills, and they are more in a community basis around other people, or technology is what we're using as a way to assist us in getting through the daily grind.
Yeah. And you're right. The dynamics certainly have changed a lot, even in the last 10 years. Obviously, in the last couple of years as well, I think there's been more pressure on people maybe not even being able to put food on the plate due to rise of
Mm.
costs, the living costs and things like that. I mean, how much stress can one really take on for the family as a parent to, in many ways, they don't want to show the kids that. They don't want to show how much stress they're really holding. But so
No.
many of those things are unconsciously projected onto the kids anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there is
Yeah.
so much sort of mental health disconnect in the younger generations, especially these days. Like, I can't
Yeah.
even remember where I saw it, but it was like children's mental health pandemic is
Mm-hmm.
like that. That worries the crap out of me.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
what can we do you think, Simone, to handle some of those pressures? Because for you, it was when you were overcoming challenges or
Mm.
had that immense stress and, with your husband and bringing a child into the world that's dependent on you,
Yeah.
physical exercise. And how many people are not doing even that? Right? So
Mm.
what do you think we can do as parents in the current circumstances of what's happening in the world?
I think it definitely needs to start from a willingness to want to be better, to be accepting of your best is good enough. And that's a really hard pill to swallow sometimes, because kids are brutally honest and they'll tell you when they think you're doing a crappy job. But I think for myself, it's always, I'm a serial learner. I just want to soak up the information and learn from people. I think that willingness and motivation within myself really does help the whole situation, that I do want to engage in these ways to make sure that I'm having a great relationship. And for me, that's what is more important than anything else at the end of the day, is the
Yeah.
relationship that I have with my kids, not just now, but when they're adults as well. Because I truly believe that if you form strong relationships with your kids when they're younger, you will really struggle as they start to get into their teen years and into their 20s. And you can't just turn it on all of a sudden and then decide that you want to be this present parent and have, all the things that you wish you did 20 odd years ago. It starts when they're young and you need to develop on that.
Yeah, it sure does. And I think before that, it comes back to what you were saying earlier, that relationship that you have with your partner. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're co-parents, right? It's not
Yeah.
it's not just a single parent, there's two of you.
Mm-hmm.
And how much is that relationship going to impact the relationship you have with your kids?
Yeah.
I mean, how important do you think it is to have that communication that's open, that's honest, and just
Mm-hmm.
truth-based?
I think it's everything. We see our household as a team.
Yeah.
And it's not, I know so many women and so many mothers just feel isolated in trying to do all of the things. We carry such a huge mental load that um, dads or partners sometimes just, they don't have that. They, everyone's working or everyone's doing what they need to do. But I really feel that it's the mother that is carrying that additional mindset and the load of things inside the house. You're still going to work every day, but then you're thinking of what are you doing for dinner and what sports have the kids got, and don't forget that note, and this one needs a doctor's appointment, and the constant chatter that is in your mind as a mum when you're still trying to be a woman and have a career, advocate for things that you feel strongly about, and the overwhelm is real. It definitely is.
Yeah. Well, do you think it is because 50 years ago it was actually so different, right? I mean, we're
Mm.
talking about some of the movements that have happened where now you can actually be a woman and go out and have a successful career and it's not shunned upon, right?
Yeah.
Do you think because there's been so much change in society that you're still playing the role of the mum, but you're also now adopting the role of, well, a successful career person? But you haven't
Yeah.
let that go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think society has a lot to do with it, but I also think a huge part of it is technology, that
Mm.
it's made it easier to compound things, and we keep stacking and layering and layering. tasks and to-dos and priorities and everything else that we feel that we are supposed to be, you know, multitasking is one of the things that I don't support.
Yeah.
It is something that we're constantly told we can multitask, we can be on the phone and we can be cooking and doing this and doing that. And it's almost become like an expectation that we can manage so much. And then we wonder why we are feeling stressed and overwhelmed, and our hormones are out of balance, and our stress is through the roof, and all of these other challenges that we start to face um, is because of the compound effect that we keep stacking.
Yeah. And I really do feel that it's that mental chatter that just keeps building and building, because physically wise, I think we're a lot more comfortable than what we've ever been. Right? We've got access to food. We don't really need to grow our own food. We don't have to get on bikes to go to school. We don't have to walk to school. There's so much reliance on, technology and as a whole thing, as a whole picture. It's made our
Mm-hmm.
lives so much more convenient. But when you get down to, I guess, the cause of why are we so stressed, and these stresses are also put onto our children as well. It comes back to the fact that, well, our brains are just constantly getting fed, right? Constantly getting fed just dopamine and serotonin.
Yeah.
And then what we're doing outside of that, so we're using these devices, we're using technology in such a wonderful way in many cases, but also such a inconsequential way. We're not necessarily aware of what are the detrimental effects of these things. But then on top of that, we're feeding ourselves with food that isn't fantastic. It maybe has been produced in some factory somewhere in the world, that's put into a box, that's kept on a shelf. Then you buy
Yeah.
from the grocery store, bring it home, start munching it down. It's not really food, but we're still eating it and claiming it as food, right? It's like, any wonder we're stressed.
It's so confusing though, and a lot of the time it's, everything comes down to being our own fault, right? We
Yeah.
make the choices, we're making these decisions, but a lot of it is really not your fault. You are just trying to do your best and you don't know what you don't know. But then when
Yeah.
you do know, you do better. And as a mum trying to work out the food, that is so challenging when you're trying to understand what's going on and you've got different things like food ratings and labels and all of these things, and it's promoted as organic, but then it's really not. It's just a word they use, and you feel like you're giving your kids something really good, and then you realize this first ingredient is sugar, and you're like, oh great, I stuffed that up. Like you constantly feel that you're trying, and then it's not quite right, and you're in this pivot all the time to try and the best you can, and you can't give yourself a hard time about that. You
Yeah.
really just need to accept that I'm doing the best I can until I know better, and then I'll do better.
Yeah. I think that's such a great mindset for anyone who's listening to actually adopt, right? Because if you're doing the best you can in this moment, well, it means that you possibly can do better in the next moment. And you can only really do better by knowing what you're doing now. So that piece of awareness is so key, because if you just ignorantly never look at a label, right? And it says organic, and what I mean by a label is the ingredients label, right? So you're looking at this organic, I don't know, whatever it is, some kind of muesli bar or something, yeah? You buy this from the supermarket, you bring it home, you're like, this is going to be wonderful for my kids. Never look at the ingredients label, and you're just going by what they're marketing it as. Well, yeah, you're playing the game of ignorance. You're choosing to not, or maybe you've made a conclusion. Using ignorance to make a conclusion is actually very disastrous. Because how much do we really know?
Yeah.
We're in an information age where everything you know has probably been outdated by 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really challenging because so much is left up to you to research yourself or figure out yourself. I really feel that our school system has well and truly outdated on all of this information around health, around hormones,
Yeah.
around, just giving proper education in terms of sex ed and physical education, those sorts of things. It is not equipping people for what they need to know in the future to make the best decisions.
Yeah.
It's the people that are researching more and that are hungry to learn themselves are the ones that are then figuring this out. And it's up to us then to share that information. And that's why I'm such a big advocate of sharing my journey, because if it just helps one person, that makes me feel good. And that makes it feel like it's worth it. So information sharing is so important.
Yeah. And it comes back to that whole trust we were talking about earlier, right? Because you really don't know if you can trust this person, what they're saying online. Let's be honest. If
Yeah.
you really got to know that person, then perhaps what they're saying is not actually what they're doing. And
Mhm.
this is becoming more and more apparent these days, this day and age, I think, because technology is so easy to use. Any fool can use it. And
Mhm.
it's so easy to get fooled because they give trust and then test it. And people who maybe they fail on the test, it's not that I resent them. It's just I've had to learn that
Mhm.
experience of whatever it is that I had to learn. And when it comes back to, well, we're raising the next generation of kids, it's super important to know where to go, but also who to trust. So
Mhm.
how do we navigate that, do you reckon, Simone? How can you navigate that?
I think you're really looking to find people that are probably, that 5 or 10 years ahead of you. If you look at them and you aspire to be like them or parent like them, um, then they are the people you think, yeah, I'm going to follow that information and I'm going to seek their ways of doing things and see if that works for me. I'll adapt a little in to make it my own style and to make it work for my family. I think
Mm,
that's, you know, probably the key part for me that I've learnt from a parenting perspective and a business perspective is not to get caught up in the marketing. And you don't know that until again, that awareness piece comes, that
until you
it's so
experience it.
easy. Yeah, it's so easy for these people who have never had kids to be like, use this product and try this thing. And, I think that's why a lot of mums these days are really looking for reviews. They want to see peer to peer reviews because they know that the marketing is so gimmicky these days. So you're really looking for who else is out there that's actually used this product or tried this method and how has it worked for them, which every human's different. So it doesn't mean you're going to have the same result, but it makes you feel a sense of ease to have someone who's a peer or someone who has tried and tested and had their own experience through that.
Yeah. I think we're talking about so many crucial elements of society that have kind of happened unconsciously, and we still allow them to control our lives in so many ways.
Mm.
And, when it comes to marketing, like you go into the supermarket, those supermarkets are intentionally laid out that way so that you buy things that you're not maybe didn't have the intention to buy,
Mhm.
right? Like it is really hard to lean into this thing that we call as intuition as well, because our bodies know, but we do get caught up in our mind when we're going for things that don't support us in the long term.
Yeah.
And it's such a complex ecosystem that we live in because, yeah, we're raising that next generation of kids, but how can we make them more conscious and better? We first need to make ourselves better. And that awareness piece is crucial.
Yeah. I think it comes back to that every single time. That and communication and just talking kids through those sorts of things. So, just the little things when you get your groceries, getting your kids to be a part of that, to help you unpack things, to watch you cook, as frustrating as it can be to get them in the kitchen and let them help you and get hands on. I've always found that the experiences that they have allows them to feel a sense of pride in
Mm.
things and it's educating them at the same time. I remember my auntie being quite shocked and overwhelmed that the boys knew what an eggplant was and a couple of other things. I'm like, wow, how do they know what that is? Well, I cook it, I chop it, say smell it, feel it, all of those kinds of things. And by doing that, I feel that I've had the opportunity to not have as much resistance with food when it comes to the kids because we talk about things. My kids understand what protein is, what carbohydrates are, what vegetables are, and what are fats and those sorts of things. And
Hmm.
yeah, people get blown away when they see my 8-year-old son sitting there eating avocado and different bits and pieces like, wow, how did you do that? It's actually just showing them the experience and bringing them on the journey with you. And
Yes.
not like, well, this is kids' food and this is mum and dad's food. Like you do need to change it with spices and things like that when they're younger. But yeah, it's easy when you are leading by demonstration. And that is something that is really, really important for me.
Yeah, it's not leaving it to the responsibility of the schools and the system that we have, right? Because clearly the system isn't helping. It's possibly training them in such a way that makes them acceptable in society. But
Mhm.
if you want your child to really grow and develop and make a real impact, you have to include them with you, right? You are their role model. Even though
Mhm.
you may not have as much influence on them as it was 20 or 30 years ago. Yeah, they're still going to look up to you. And the more you incorporate them and take them on the journey of you're doing this life together in many ways,
Yeah.
especially when they're young. Like if you don't do that when they're young, you're probably going to miss out altogether. And it's
Yeah.
just so important. I think that message of just including your kids and having a willingness to dance with them, essentially. Don't just let them be on the sidelines or yourself be on the sidelines. Like, get involved.
Yeah. That was always a huge thing for me. I didn't want to be a sideline mum. I wanted to really overcome my insecurities of my body changes and things that happened after having children. I didn't want to be that mum that didn't want to get in the pool or wasn't willing to go and play and do those sorts of things because I realized every time that I got actively involved with my kids, I felt such a sense of joy and such a sense of relief of letting go of all the adult responsibilities and being, that fun kid again and jumping on the jumping castle and doing those kinds of things. It just was the kids loved it so much, but I think I was really surprised at how happy it made me feel as well. And it can just melt away the stress of so many things at times as well.
Yeah, I think what you said there is so important because if you're not getting involved and you're not facing your own, I guess, demons in many ways, like the
Mhm.
insecurities that you may have as an adult that maybe you didn't have as a child, but maybe some of those insecurities were actually projected on you by your parents, not on purpose, but just that it just happened, right?
Yeah.
The only way you can get over them is by facing them, really.
Yeah.
And when you have a child, it's like you get to be a child again in many ways because
Mhm.
you're meeting them at their level.
Yeah. Absolutely. And having young boys, which are extremely active, I don't get to do any of the art and craft stuff. They are just not into those sorts of things. So it is very much, Mum, come and watch me on the trampoline, or come and do this, or, push me on the swing, and very kind of active sort of stuff. And instead of just being on the side, it's like, well, I'll jump on the swing too and,
Hmm.
smile and laughter can change so much. It's amazing, and I don't think we realize that. It doesn't have to be, as a mum, you really feel that you don't get the time for yourself anymore, but it is those smaller things that can just melt away the daily grind and just that's the stuff you remember at the end of the day, right? You vaguely remember all the crying and maybe the endless nights of no sleep and those kinds of things, but when you really reflect on it, the joy that you feel in those moments from the happiness
Yeah.
is nothing like thinking of how hard it was in those moments of the sleepless nights, or the broken sleep and all of those kinds of things. You remember it and it was still painful, but it's nothing like the joy you feel of actually getting inside those moments with your kids.
Yeah. And those times that maybe you don't get to yourself anymore, maybe those moments that you experience such joy with your kids, maybe
Mm.
those are the moments that are perfectly made for yourself, right?
Mm.
Because you get to relive being a child and perhaps healing those parts of yourself that if you didn't have a willingness to do so, they're still going to be there.
Yeah.
So I think that message of be with your kids, have fun with them, and don't forget to be a kid as well, because kids are fearless in many
Mm.
ways, and they have to test the boundaries constantly. And I'm sure you've had to navigate that with your 3 young boys and continue to navigate it.
Yeah, 100%. And, as much as we have fun and we're there to interact and communicate with our kids, I do have quite a strict routine that I
Yeah.
like to follow. With my husband being a shift worker and me parenting solo, quite often, rules and boundaries is what makes it work for me. So having that acceptance of there's different times of the days when different things happen. Yes, you can go and be the fun mum and do those things, and then there's times where you're like, okay, this is what's happening now and this is the order that we're going to do them in. And sometimes the kids don't like that. Generally, my experience is that they enjoy the routine. It actually gives them some structure, and they seem to flow quite well with that, as opposed to not having a bedtime or not having an evening routine and those sorts of things. Routines have worked really well for us.
Yeah.
And, even when the kids, I've had times with Ethan where he said, well, I don't like that, or I'm not happy about that. And I let him know that it's okay. He doesn't have to like it. He
Mm.
doesn't have to appreciate it. And I've even said to him at times, I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to help you be a good human. And one day when you're older, you'll understand that. And it's okay that you don't get that right now. You
Yeah.
can be mad. You can not like me right now. As hard as it is to hear that as a parent of your child being like, I don't like you, or, I hate you right now, or something that they might say in the moment, you have to kind of just let that go. And just, if you feel strongly about the situation, then you need to hold to that belief and what you're doing.
Yeah, you really got to stick to your own guns, and whatever that is for you, it's yours. Yeah.
Yeah. And I believe that's when co-parenting, that dynamic really needs to come into it as well, because if you're holding firm on something and then they just go and ask dad and he's like, yeah, okay, then you fight, then that's when the disconnect of parenting comes in. And when your kids know that they can find that little loophole hole or that gap, then they will be in it at any chance that they can. And that's when it can cause some conflict in your relationship as well. So
Yeah.
having those boundaries and being clear together as parents what they are,
Yeah.
I believe that really helps you and supports you on your journey as well.
Yeah, totally. And well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, Simone. It's been a real pleasure. I just would love to ask another question if that's okay. And it's something that I normally ask, but I'm going to ask it slightly different. And that is, at any part of your journey where you felt like massively overwhelmed, maybe there was a moment, I don't know, when one of your kids was born, or maybe it was the one you were talking about earlier, where with Ethan when he was first born, or when you were pregnant and found out that your husband had the tumor. Knowing what you know now and having experienced it all, for all the mums out there, for even the single dads who might be listening, and they're really struggling right now. They're really like, I really don't know if this is going to end. Like this is so chaotic and so bad. Like I just can't handle it anymore. What kind of wisdom could you share with us all that's maybe a good reflection point for you, but it also helps people just understand that there is a bit of an end to it. We're going to get better.
I think the absolute thing that's really coming to me is knowing that you're not alone. There's always someone to talk to. You may already know them. They may be in your circle, or they may be a complete stranger. I think just ensuring that you've got somebody that you can speak to. And we're very lucky here in Australia. We do have a lot of support lines and info lines and all those sorts of things. Being a parent, whether it's the first time or the third time or anything in between, it's different every single time. Just because you've done it, one way, it doesn't always work the same way the next time. And it can feel very overwhelming and isolating as well when you feel that people don't understand the situation you're in. So I think it is really coming back to what we've said so many times in this episode as well, as awareness. Once you're aware of something, then you can begin to change it. But until you have the awareness, then you can't. And awareness comes from communication and education, in my opinion. So finding those people that you can talk to, whether it's a mother's group, a family member, or even a complete stranger, it can do the world of difference to just lift you up in that moment of overwhelm.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, there's no shame in asking for help. And if anyone is struggling out there and they really just can't deal with whatever's happening right now, like, simply just take a breath for a second and then realize that it's okay to ask for help. Like Simone said, there are many, many support lines. If you've got no one, like, you'd probably have a device, you probably have a phone. Just call one of the support lines. There's heaps out there. There's 24/7 lines. Just don't hesitate to reach out, because ultimately your well-being, the health and the survival of your child is dependent on your well-being. And if you're not well, how can you care for your child? So a little bit selfish, you have to take care of yourself first so that you can be there for your child in that next moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Simone, thank you so much for being here with me today. And it's always insightful chatting with you. And thank you so much for giving us your wisdom and your experience as well. I think many listeners and many viewers will resonate with what you said, and take some of those lessons and instill it in their own parent journey. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Shaun. It's always a pleasure having our conversations. So I really appreciate it, and to all of your listeners as well.
No worries. And thank you all for tuning in. We also cannot wait to see you in the next episode. If you'd love Simone to be on the podcast again, please do comment, and please like and subscribe. If you can give us a rating on your streaming platform, it really just helps promote the podcast. And look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Have a beautiful one. Take care.